Okie dokie. So here's the deal. We're not in school today, so we're doing this via Zoom/video I'm sending out. So here's what you're doing today. One, you should have joined Zoom for attendance. Two, I'm going to leave the Zoom open to the end of the hour. I'm probably going to cut it about 2 minutes short of the actual hour. Like I'm going to drop out of the Zoom about 2 minutes short. So depending on what class that you're in, shave about 2 minutes off the top. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is I'm leaving the Zoom open. If you have questions, you get back on Zoom to ask those questions to me so I can help you out. But the goal today is to watch this video, answer, not really questions. What you're doing is you have a list of names. And this list of names is several women in history that you should know about. And you are going to write down or type, your call, I don't care which one you do, notes about these women as I talk about them in the video. And by the end of the hour, and I mean by the end of the hour, this shouldn't happen at the end of the day. This should happen right during this hour. This should not take all hour to do, by the way, if you just get started on it right away. But you are going to send me a either picture if you handwrite it, or you're going to send me a document with all the notes of your about these women. And these notes that you send me is going to be a homework grade, and then you can use it on tomorrow's quiz, which we're going to be doing online. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. So let's get into the notes. I don't know if this is in the exact order of this thing, but we're gonna see. So Susan B. Anthony, first person I would talk about, I would write down for sure, wrote the suffrage amendment or wrote the 19th Amendment. Her language is what's in the 19th Amendment. She founded the National Women's Suffrage Association. Quick story about her, she was arrested. She went to a barbershop, a polling place to basically cast a vote. She's arrested. They put her in jail. They put a bond on her for $1,000. And then they make it, when she goes to the court case, to the trial for being convicted for doing what she did. I know, how dare her try to vote. They didn't allow her to speak. They charged her a $100 fine, and then they put her in jail for 10 days. She never paid the fine, though. So big thing for her is she wrote the suffrage amendment as we know it today, the 19th Amendment as we know it today. The next person that I want to talk about is Elizabeth Stanton. Now, Elizabeth Stanton was the president of Nassau, NAWCA, WSA, for 20 years, the president of this. She starts the women's movement officially. She really got the ball rolling. So for Elizabeth Stanton, she started this movement as a force to be reckoned with. You know, when she was a kid, her dad would consistently say, you know, I wish you were a boy. So I want you to think about that right now. You have this idea, even in society, that you have, I wish you were a boy instead of a girl, as in girl is less than. She eventually gets married, and she changes the language of marriage, the marriage ceremony. Instead of saying, the woman saying, I'm going to obey my husband, she got rid of that completely. She saw as marriage as a unifying front, something that is a partnership, not something that you should obey somebody in. She was also a abolitionist. She was against slavery. She rewrote parts of, she wrote what was called the Woman's Bible. And in the Woman's Bible, she got rid of any mention of women being subservient to men. But the big thing for her is she really started the women's movement. There is a person named Carrie Chapman Catt, or Triple C. She came up with what's called the winning plan, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But the winning as in a winning plan, is the big thing to write down for her. But she also, in her life, she saw her dad going to vote one day. And Carrie Chapman Catt, seeing her dad go vote, asked her dad and mom, Mommy, are you going to go vote too? And her parents started laughing at her because the idea of a woman voting was so out there, it was so crazy that it was laughable. And this sticks with her. And eventually she is going to be part of the group of people that are going to push for this 19th Amendment. And she comes up with the winning plan. So the thing to write down about winning plan is her goal was not to get the amendment right away. Her goal was to go from state to 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 get 36 states to allow women to vote in their state so then they can push for the amendment. That's the winning plan. Going state by state by state by state until you get all the states that you need to get the winning plan. Alice Paul. Now, Alice Paul is one of my personal favorites, and it has to do with how much she dedicated her life to women's rights. Now, many people in the movement back then didn't like Alice Paul that much, and the reason why is because she was considered militant. She was fight power with power, right? She's like, let's bring it to them. Let's grind our teeth. Let's get in there. And she had a protest outside the White House, one of the first women's protests outside the White House. And while she's doing this protest, she gets arrested. And then while she's in jail, she is force fed, because the reason why she's force fed is she wanted to go on a hunger strike to make more people pay attention to her movement. To get force fed back then, they took your arms and they strapped them down. They then had multiple people holding you down so you couldn't flail about. They then took a hose and they shoved it up your nose to the back all the way down your esophagus. Now, by the way, very dangerous to feed people this way, because if you mess up, you can actually get this stuff into the lungs, and then that can cause a pneumonia type reaction, and then you could die. So they did this. They shoved this tube down her nose, and she's strapped down, and they took this mixture of like milk and chopped up food, and they basically just shoved it down this tube, and they force fed her like this while she was in jail. So Alice Paul, she was arrested, she was force fed, she fought the power with the power and was willing to put her literal body on the line to do so for women's rights. Definitely someone that's one of my favorites to talk about. Next person, Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin was from Montana, and she was the first woman ever elected to U.S. Congress. So if you're going to write something about her, she's the first woman ever elected to U.S. Congress. She was known for really two major acts, other than the being a women's suffrage leader. Two other things that she was known for. So women's suffrage leader, yes. But she voted for both world wars. She was in Congress for both world wars, and she voted against them. And her idea was, we have our own problems at home, and we need to kind of like clean our own house before we start cleaning the house of others, if you will. We need to get our own situation in order. So she really pushed for this idea of peace. It was something that many people were against her idea. They said we should go to war, especially after Pearl Harbor. But she voted against both wars. But big thing for her, first woman ever elected to Congress, and that's pretty much where she's at there. Okay, the next person is Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and we were going to read parts of this book in class, if you were in class, but we can't, and that's fine. She wrote a book called Women in Economics, and she made a lot of valid points. The big thing to write down is she wrote a book that was called Women and Economics. And one of the ideas she kind of like attacked was the idea that there is a female brain and a male brain. Like there's a boy brain and a girl brain. And she said that is just, it's a load of baloney, because there is no female male brain, just as there's not a female male liver. She was arguing that this idea is, if we walk down this line of separating the brains and saying one is better or less than or whatever, we go down a really bad path. And it's the same thing as going, they have a women's liver and a man's liver. They're just livers. A women's pinky toe and a man's pinky toe. They're just pinky toes, that type of thing. The other thing that she did is she talked about this idea that men who have power in society, which there's no argument that they didn't have power. Like they did have power back then, especially. They have power in society. And in the book, she argues, even though they set up a scenario where they have all the power and it makes it so they have to work and women can't work based on the power struggle, men still complain about the fact that they have to work all the time, even though they've set up a system where they are the only ones that can work and women can't, because they don't want women to have money to be financially stable on their own. So, but we're going to complain that we have to work all the time. But you said it. That's what she's saying. You did. It's like, stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. You're like, if you have a brother or sister that like you like take their hand, don't ever do this. This is not authentic. But you slap your brother or sister with their hands. Stop hitting yourself. Stop. That's kind of what she's saying men are doing. So she wrote a book about women in economics, made a bunch of points about women in the world. Let's move on to different women in history. So this is a shout out to women throughout history that are in some history books. And I know it's not directly tied to U.S. history, but it does value the idea that women are in history. We just might not hear about them so much. And the first one I want to talk about is Cleopatra. Cleopatra was from 51 to 30 BC. So this is back in Caesar's time during the Roman Empire. Cleopatra is seen as possibly a beauty, or as somebody of non-beauty, depending on what historical account that you take. Back in her day, keep things in mind. This is going to keep a little strange because it's back in the day. In Egypt, there was a ruling class called the Ptolemies. And the Ptolemies ruled for a very long time. And one of the rules they had was having a pure bloodline, which was family would have children with family. Brothers and sisters would get married and they'd have kids that were pure blood. So her father dies when she's around 18 years old. And that means she becomes the queen, but she has to share throne with her 10-year-old brother. I said that right. Her and her brother are going to be basically a couple. And he's 10 and he's 18. She's 18. But the 10-year-old brother kicks her out of Egypt. And at this time, there's a fight going on between Caesar and this guy named Pompey. And Pompey flees to Egypt, and this brother of Cleopatra kills Pompey to try to make go, see, Caesar, what I did? I killed this guy you didn't like. And Caesar hated this kid for doing this. Because although he was an enemy to Pompey, they were also friends most of life, and he actually didn't want to see Pompey dead. So Caesar's upset, and in this exact moment, Cleopatra springs kind of a trap. She gets wrapped up in a carpet and walked through the streets of Egypt and brought to, and she has to hide because if her brother finds out that she's in town again, she's dead as a doornail. So they unveil her out of this carpet in front of Caesar, and they make a deal with each other. So you have Cleopatra, who's been exiled, who's been kicked out of her own place, who's basically on death's door if her brother finds her again, finds a way to get into the town to make a deal with the most powerful person, not just in Rome, but you could argue in Europe at the time, in Northern Africa at the time. And Caesar goes, I like your moxie, kid. And basically goes, you know what? I think what we should do is we could work together. And because she uses Caesar, she takes over the throne of Egypt. Her brother will eventually be exiled. He'll drown. And then to kind of help Caesar, she has a child with him. Because back then, having more children is good, especially having children in different places that could take over thrones. And she has a male child called Caesarion. And eventually Caesar gets stabbed. The Ides of March, stabby, stabby, stabby. And she realizes her power in Rome, Caesar, is gone. So what does she do? She attacks again, and she gets into the next best person, Mark Antony. Mark Antony was a friend of Caesar, and she eventually seduces him, and they become a couple, and they fight a war against Rome, which was really bad to do. They get in this giant ship battle, and eventually Cleopatra flees the ship battle, and leaves Mark Antony behind, but he's so in love with her, he forgives her, but eventually kills himself. And she was going to talk to the new Caesar called Octavian and say, see, I killed Antony for you. And she realized that Octavia was going to take her, drag her through the streets, and parade her in front of Rome and basically kill her a slow death. So she took her own life with a cobra bite to the chest. And that's Cleopatra, a person who was marked for death, but eventually will become victorious and rule Egypt for several years, and uses her intellect to outwit many men, including Caesar and Mark Antony in the process. Boudicca also is going to go against Rome. She is from where we would know England today, Britain today. She was part of the Celts, the Iceni to be more specific. These were warriors that would paint their bodies completely blue going into battle. She was queen, and the king of the time made a deal with the Romans that the Romans would give them so much money, basically leave them alone. And then the king dies, and Rome lied. They did not honor their deal. They start going back to the Celts, going back to England. They go through towns. They assault their women. They take their money. They destroy their buildings. They eventually attack Boudicca's daughters in front of her, and Boudicca is then beaten and left bloody on the ground. And Boudicca's like, I'm done. And she gets about an army of about 120,000 Iceni and Celts to attack Rome. And Rome goes, what's this woman going to do? Well, this woman kicked their butts for a long time. So Boudicca marches in and destroys town after town after town after town that was controlled by the Romans. Eventually, Boudicca is taken out, but the story of Boudicca is pretty simple. You have a woman that was underestimated by the most powerful army that in the world at the time, and for a very long time during these battles, made Rome look like a bunch of wimps. So go Boudicca. Definitely needs to be part of the history books. It is an interesting story to say the least. Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was part of the 100 Years' War, which was England versus France. And she was on the France side. Now, she's 16 years old. A couple years older than you guys sitting right here online. And she eventually gets her own military outfit at 16 years old to fight for the French. She leads people in battle with men on her side that did not want her to fight. And even when they said, no, we're not going to follow you, she still got people to follow them, and she fought in many battles. She turned the tide for the French to beat the English. She took places like Orleans and France, but eventually she's captured and sent to England, and they go through the process of an inquisition. An inquisition is basically like spill all the tea that you've ever done bad in an investigation to make you look bad. But the thing is, Joan of Arc was young, and she was squeaky clean, and they couldn't find anything, but she couldn't read. So they tricked her into signing a confession, but she can't read. And based on this signed confession, they burn her at the stake. Matter of fact, they set fire to her twice. They burn her, all the embers go out. They put more wood up to burn the rest of her to make sure it's all ash, and they scattered her ashes. But Joan of Arc takes on one of the most biggest powerhouses. She's 16 years old, turns the tide for the French in the 100 Years' War. Let's keep going. The next person I want to talk about is Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams is crucial to the second president of the United States, John Adams. John Adams is kind of the forgotten president of the United States. John Adams typically just people don't pay attention. I personally enjoy talking about John Adams, but whatever. John Adams fires his cabinet members. A cabinet is a group of people that advise the president about a number of things, about economics, about diplomacy, about how you interact with the world, how you interact with your constituents, and he fires them all. Why? Because they were working for somebody he didn't like, and he wanted to have people he could trust. And Abigail Adams, in an unofficial capacity, but truly does this, is John Adams's cabinet. She advises him throughout his presidency and really does serve as the first cabinet led by a woman, Abigail Adams. She also wrote John Adams several times about the founding of our nation, and she discussed this idea of remembering the ladies. Now, a lot of people misquote this. What she was really arguing for, she wasn't arguing for the vote. A lot of people use this as arguing for the vote. If you look at the words, it's not saying that at all. What it's talking about, the remember the ladies, is she's arguing for property rights. You see, when women got married, they lost all rights. All their rights went to their husband. And she was arguing for this idea that women deserve property rights. So yes, Abigail Adams, she was the cabinet for the second president of the United States. She was the first woman to actually live in the White House. And she fought for women's right to property and also to be their own person in the marriage that should be protected. Sacagawea. Sacagawea she is awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed talking about Sacagawea. There is this expedition that takes place, Lewis and Clark expedition. They're gonna look at the Louisiana Purchase, and they're gonna try to figure out what this land is and how important it is. So what they do is Lewis and Clark are going, and she used to be part of the Shoshone tribe, but then she's sold to a French fur trader. And while she's in the French fur trader's house, which, by the way, it has a polygamous relationship. That means he has multiple wives, and she's one of the wives. She ends up getting pregnant by him, and while she's pregnant, Lewis and Clark kind of like end up near this fur trader, and Lewis and Clark hire the fur trader to come with them to like speak the languages of the Native Americans. And the fur trader's like, that's fine, but Sacagawea, not Pocahontas, different Native American. Sacagawea is brought along in this expedition to explore the western part of our country at the time. She's pregnant, and she is going to go through forests, through creeks, up rivers, up mountains. She's pregnant, and she actually delivers her child while on this expedition. Lewis and Clark would not have survived without her. She showed them how to find food in times that they were starving. She was a communicator to Native Americans that her husband didn't know how to talk to. And there was a time that the Shoshone Native Americans actually captured Lewis and Clark and were going to kill these guys. And she goes, dude, you're my brother, and actually recognized the leader as her brother, because you remember she left that a long time ago, and saved their lives. So without her, you wouldn't have the Lewis and Clark expedition. You wouldn't have all the adventures that came out of it and all the ideas that they brought back for Thomas Jefferson and everyone else to look into when looking into or looking towards the West. Harriet Tubman. Now, I talked about her, man, tons of times. But Harriet Tubman, she's just a powerhouse. She was part of the Underground Railroad. She was a nurse in the Civil War. She was a spy in the Civil War, and she was a commander of troops in the Civil War. First woman to be a commander, not only just first woman, but first woman and first former slave to ever have that power to command troops to actually overrun plantations and free slaves. Harriet Tubman, she is definitely one of my top faves when it comes to people in warfare and just women in history in general. Edith Wilson. If you're going to write anything about Edith Wilson, write down first unofficial woman president in the history of our country. So Woodrow Wilson has a stroke, 18 months left in his administration. And when she has a stroke, he can't do his job anymore. And Edith Wilson actually does the president's job. Like she goes from Congress to the president, who can't really talk or do anything, and starts making decisions on behalf of the country. It's like a Weekend at Bernie's. I know it's a reference most of you don't get, but it's basically what she did is when Congress would come over to visit the president, she would like prop him up at his desk and say, see, he's working. They would do photos of him at his desk when he was sitting there. And basically she ran the country as the unofficial first woman president. So you go, Edith Wilson. And last but not least, we already talked about her before, Deborah Sampson. I know she's not on their list, but it's somebody you should talk about. Remember Deborah Sampson, she was the one in the Revolutionary War that was taught both the male roles and female roles of the time. She knew how to hunt, knew how to sew, knew how to cook. She dressed like a man to get into the war. When she got into the American Revolution, she was shot, but she had to fake that she was a boy, so she couldn't scream out loud. She eventually dug out one bullet out of her leg, and the other bullet she had to leave in that actually stayed in her leg the rest of the war. She's just an overall just beast. We talked about her before, but that's just something to know. With that said, that's all the people of this particular unit, or for this particular lesson. Write those notes down, send them to me for homework grade, and then tomorrow we'll take a quiz on all this material. Peace out.